This next project was actually another take on that little wall strap that I created with the wool fabric earlier, but this one is just a wall pocket and it is super simple to recreate. You're just going to need 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11 felt, and on one of the pieces you're going to start by rimming the entire outside, leaving a 2.5-inch section at the top that you're not going to be adding glue to, because once you actually adhere this down, the sides and the bottom are going to be nice and adhered, but that 2.5-inch section you're actually going to want to fold down like this, add a little bit of glue to either side as shown, and fold that down. That way it kind of creates this little pocket flap, lay a couple books on top, and once you're done you could hang this on the wall and add whatever you'd like inside. This little trinket box turned out super cute, but honestly the technique that I used to create a crackle finish is just a fun one to have in your DIY skill set. So you're going to definitely need some Elmer's glue, some acrylic paint, and a wooden box of your choice. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is actually go ahead and paint it with the color that you want your cracks to be. So I went ahead and painted it white to start. You could paint it gold if you'd like to and kind of have a gold crack underneath black, which I think would be really pretty, or you could paint it however you'd like. The next step is going to be applying a generous layer of Elmer's glue on the top section that you're going to be applying, and then right over top of the Elmer's glue, before it can dry, literally immediately after applying it, go ahead and apply on a layer of your acrylic paint. And as it starts to dry, the glue will actually separate the paint and create a cracked finish, which is really great. So the thicker the glue you apply, the thicker the cracks, and if you want daintier cracks, just apply a thinner layer of glue. Here's a fun DIY on how to turn your basic pillowcases into these gradient dyed pillowcases. You're just going to need some RIT dye. I use the powder form, a couple of cups, a paintbrush, and your pillowcases. So the first thing that I started off by doing was adding the same amount of water into each cup, and I did use warm water. And next what I did was I actually varied the amount of dye pigment that I applied to each cup. So the first cup I added 1 teaspoon, the second cup I added 2 teaspoons, the third cup I added 3 teaspoons, and so on from there. That way we have an array of pigmentation. And I went ahead and I started off with my darkest color first because it's just easier to start darkest and go lighter. So I applied about a 2-inch strip of our darkest color and worked my way down to the lightest section, probably only applying water at the very end. So as you can see here, this is what the gradient dye is going to look like. Wash out the excess dye and style with a couple of cute throw pillows. If you're wanting to DIY a gift for your friend this year, I highly suggest these really cute best friend pillows. Basically, all I did was I grabbed some velvet fabric, some chunky yarn, Fabri-Tac adhesive, and a pair of scissors. And the first thing that I'm going to do is lay out my velvet fabric and just kind of freehand a heart shape, or half of the heart shape. So as you can see here on the left side, my fabric is folded in half. That way when I cut out this shape, I'm going to have 2 of them. So the first thing I did was I freehanded out half of the heart, then I cut it out with some fabric scissors. Next, what I did was I went ahead and I created a little crack down the center. You can totally make this a straight line if you want to, or you can kind of make it jagged like this. I thought it added a cute little element to the piece, and you're going to need 2 pieces for the left side and 2 pieces for the right side. And once you have those cut out, just make sure that you're pinning the right sides of the fabric together, or pinning the sides of the fabric that you want to show on the outside sandwiched together, and then go ahead and sew the outside of this and leave about a 3-inch section opening. That way you can fill it up with your polyfill or your recycled materials, whatever you want to put inside to fill up your pillow there. So as you can see, once they are both completed, they're going to look something like this. But I did have to add a little best friend detail on the front there, so I just used my Fabri-Tac adhesive and just freehand wrote out best friends, and it kind of cascades across both pillows because once you put them together, you're going to be able to read the full message. But I love the idea of having both of them kind of separated, but you still understand what it says, and that finishes off this pillow. Another super affordable set of coasters created here on the channel were these leather wrapped coasters. Now the supplies are very minimal. All you're going to need is some foam board and also some faux leather material. So the first thing that I did was I cut down the scrap piece of foam board into 4-inch by 4-inch squares. Those are going to be our coaster size. Next, once you have those cut out, you're going to go ahead and just cut out a piece of your vinyl leather or your faux leather and cut it out with about 1 inch to spare on all the edges. That way you can go ahead and apply your E6000 adhesive on the bottom side, press it it onto your faux leather material, and then you're going to press that down just as shown here. Next, what I did was I cut off all of the corners, that way we can create a nice clean fold, and I also make sure to leave about an 1/8 inch of material on that corner, that way when you fold it up, you get a fully covered corner as opposed to having any of the white show through there. So I just went ahead and I adhered down all of our flaps on the back side, let it dry, and cut out a piece of material to glue over the top of those flaps there, and once you are done, this is your finished coaster set. This eucalyptus wall decor is a great way to add a minimal touch to your space. It adds a little bit of greenery, but also a fresh scent of eucalyptus. So all I did was I actually went ahead and I purchased a fresh sprig of eucalyptus from the grocery store, and I'm going to go ahead and just cut off a couple pieces that I like as seen here, and then I'm going to be wrapping around the top of them with a piece of string just to kind of finish off the edge and give it a more polished look for our wall hanging. Tie off your string at the end and leave probably about 2 to 3 feet of excess string. That way you can vary the lengths as you apply it to our wooden dowel a little bit later. So just go ahead and tie these off onto all of your pieces of eucalyptus that you want to add. I believe I did an odd number of about 7 pieces. So once you have all of your eucalyptus all strung up and ready to go, we can start applying this to our wooden dowel. And when it came to constructing the final piece, I just went ahead and made sure that all my eucalyptus pieces were hanging at different lengths, so it just added a little bit more visual interest and not everything was at the same exact level. So I just double knotted these onto my wooden dowel all the way down, making sure they were nicely secured. And once you have them all attached, you can hang it on your wall, and that finishes off your eucalyptus wall hanging. This next project is an IKEA hack where I basically took these wooden cutting boards and I measured an inch in on each of the corners and I marked the inch in spot. That way we can know where we're going to be drilling our holes later, because we are going to be turning this into a hanging shelving unit. And this project turned out so cute. I love the way that it turned out in the end. So I just went ahead, brought these pieces outside and used a drill bit that was wide enough for the rope material that we're going to be using here. So as you can see, I got this rope here at the Home Depot. It is a simple nylon rope. And the first thing that I did was I grabbed 2 pieces of my rope and I folded it in half at the very middle point and I tied it in a knot as shown here. Next, what I did was I measured down about 18 inches from our knot and I just made a little marking on our piece because that is exactly where we're going to be tying our knots on each section. Now the knot is what's going to be holding our shelf in place, so you're actually going to want to make sure that all of your knots are in a very similar spot. That way your shelf is very level and it's not off center, because if you have knots that are hanging lower on one side, your shelf is then going to hang lower on one side as well. So using a ruler, measure down about 12 inches, make a marking, and just make sure that you tie your knot in the same spot once again. The great thing about this project is you can totally adjust the knots as needed. They're not anything that is super tight, and once the shelf actually sits on top of the knot, it kind of tightens itself naturally. You can hang this up and enjoy your new hanging shelf. This next project right here is definitely one of my favorite IKEA hacks I've ever created. I actually used this wooden tray from IKEA and this large mirror that I got at Joann's, along with some faux leather material, some E6000, and a couple of wooden blocks. So the first thing that I did was I took my large circular mirror and I'm going to be gluing down some of these little wooden blocks, which are basically just going to be spacers, and just elevating it off of our tray in the back. And if you wanted to, you can totally just adhere the mirror directly down to the tray, but I ended up using these little wooden blocks just to elevate it off the tray a little bit. I just think that it adds a nice bit of dimension to the piece, and it just makes the mirror look like it's actually floating in the center of the tray. And next, what I did was I grabbed this faux leather material and I'm cutting out a 3-inch wide section. And you're going to want to make these strips down the longest side of your fabric, because we're going to want very long strips. That way we can create the band that's going to wrap around the outside of our mirror and just give it that very rustic, elevated appearance. So using a little bit of hot glue, I just went ahead and I adhered this down the entire strip there, just making sure that I folded it in half. And the reason that I did fold it in half was just to save a little bit of my material. I knew that the folded in half section, or the ugly side, can face the back of the mirror, which is going to be against the wall. So what I did was I just adhered my strips together and then I E6000 them on the outside of my mirror using clothespins to stick them down as the adhesive dried. Now what we're going to be doing towards the top here is creating this little section, which is kind of like a triangle, and you're going to want to adhere these 2 strips together there, place a book on top, let it dry, and once it is dry you can hang it on the wall. I think this rustic clay bowl was actually my first time ever using clay in a DIY project, and so this is how it ended up turning out. I used a glass bowl from Target and some of this air dry clay from the craft store, and I went ahead and I just added a thick layer of air dry clay on the entire exterior of our glass bowl, and I used a little bit of water to smooth it down. Now I know that sometimes water doesn't work with air dry clay, but specifically for this project, I do remember it smoothing it down quite a bit. And then I went ahead and I pressed a little new base for it and used a paintbrush just to add a little bit of detail into our clay work. And this is where I feel like the water totally made a difference. You can totally see where I'm adding the water. It just smooths out those sections and overall just makes the clay look a little bit nicer. So once it was dried overnight, I went back in with a sand file and just filed down any edges that were a little bit rough. And then I went in with a little bit of black paint that was watered down and just kind of distressed the bowl a little bit, added my signature on the bottom, and that finished off your rustic clay bowl. As many of you guys know, I love making throw pillows here on the channel, so here is a geometric yarn pillow that's really fun to recreate. I just used one of the Vigdis pillow bases, some white yarn, some Fabri-Tac adhesive, and some scissors. So all I started off by doing was grabbing a ruler and just kind of creating a couple of geometric shapes on the front side of this pillow. These shapes are kind of just going to act as a basis for our geometric yarn designs that we're going to be creating on top there. So as you can see, for the first one here, I actually cut every single individual piece of yarn all the way across, but as I worked on this pillow a little bit more, I realized that I can just make the yarn kind of loop back and forth, and I was going to be creating a border on it, as you can see here, with a little bit of yarn in the end, so I knew that those would be covered. So I just went ahead and I created these little sections on the front of the pillow, filled them in with yarn, and once they were done, it just reminded me of a piece you would see at Target.